I'm pretty confident that none of you ever forget anything that I say on a week-to-week basis. But I know that I do. So for anybody who either wasn't here or forgot since last week, let me recap where we are in this series that hopefully you've realized is about Exodus. So the nation of Israel are slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt. And what that means is that they have no will of their own. They are captives, and that slavery is ultimately going to lead to death because Pharaoh has decided that every young male baby that's born should be thrown into the Nile River and killed. And so there's not only facing the death of young baby boys, but they're facing the death of a nation and the death of the hope that God had started with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and right on through. And that looks like that whole hope is coming to an end. And I think, even though that story is somewhere around 3,500 years ago, that we can actually resonate in our lives in 2022 in Mifflin County with that kind of story because in a similar sense, our culture over the past 50 years has killed about 65 million babies through abortion, and so we can't say that's their problem and we're any different. Also, we all face somewhere down the road, maybe sooner for some of us than others, but we all face this idea of certain death. And we were reminded of that just yesterday at the graveside service for Nancy Allmiller, that whether you want to admit it or not, it's coming for all of us, this idea of death. And our culture also has this pervasive sense nowadays of hopelessness. You can oftentimes see that because a lot of folks talk about having issues related to anxiety and depression, both of which basically stem from a lack of hope. And so we ended Exodus chapter 1 at that kind of pretty terrible sin, slavery, death sort of place. And the hope, as we just sang, the significant hope, both back then in Egypt, as well as for all of us right now, is that Lord help us all, let's hope a deliverer is going to come. And that's where we find ourselves as we begin Exodus chapter 2. Exodus chapter 2 starts with the birth of a baby, a little baby boy, to two unnamed Levite parents. Two unnamed Levite parents. And now the tribe of Levi is eventually going to become the priests. They're going to be the mediators between God and people. And so there's this baby boy that's born into that tribe, the mediators between God and his people. And we have the same kind of hope that we eventually have for Jesus himself. This boy, as you may or may not recall, it says that because of this edict or this idea from Pharaoh that all young baby boys should be thrown into the Nile River and killed, the mom has to kind of keep the baby hidden for a bit. And then the next thing you know, I think it's in verse 3, we find this description of what happens with little baby boy. Can you go to the next slide, please? Thanks. So his mother took for him an ark made of bulrushes, dabbed it with bitumen and pitch. She put the child in it, placed it among the reeds by the riverbank. My guess is a bunch of y'all have read this story in a kid's Bible or in the Bible or something, and you're right now about to call me a heretic because you say, wait a second, I thought this whole time she put him in a basket. Now you're going around saying it was an ark. The reason I'm saying that is because actually the word tevah, T-E-V-A-H in Hebrew, is the exact same word used here as the word for the Ark of Noah. And so what we find here in Exodus 2 is that God is a saving God, and he's a big fan of arks, first to save Noah from the flood, and now this little tiny miniature ark that the baby is put inside of, and he's kept safe. And so this baby is inside this little ark, and sure enough, Pharaoh's daughter goes to bathe in the Nile River, and she notices, or one of the attendants notices, this little baby ark, and goes over and grabs it, and this young baby is found, and he's extracted out, and Pharaoh's daughter adopts him. I'll just pause there and say, it did not pass me by that Pharaoh, right, the enemy of Egypt, she did the thing called adopting a baby boy that would receive death otherwise, and that ties in pretty well, I think, with some of the Orphan Care Alliance stuff that's going on around here. In any case, what's really cool about the fact that this ark saves this baby boy is that when he's taken out, the exact waters that were meant to destroy him, right, the Pharaoh's edict was throw the baby into the Nile River so they'll die. Technically speaking, his mom does that, and yet that's actually the very source. The place of death is the very source of the salvation. It's an awesome, awesome story. And I hope your brain is clicking and thinking, that sounds an awful lot like the cross of Jesus Christ. The Pharaoh's daughter names this baby, and I'm going to use for this whole series the actual Hebrew pronunciation, Moshe. Moshe. So I'm sure y'all have heard of him as Moses, but in my mind, going to the Hebrew pronunciation allows us the chance to kind of think about this person maybe a little differently and open up this story in a way that might be fresh or new to you in some way, shape, or form. So little baby boy is taken out. She says his name is Moshe. Now, what I'd like to do now is I want to share more obviously and clearly and specifically a list of similarities between this baby boy Moshe, his birth, and I've been hinting at it so far, but there's a lot of overlap between Moshe and Jesus. And so I want to just lay out very clearly some of those similarities right now. So here's a couple similarities. Baby boy Moshe, birth of Jesus. Here we go. The first one is that both of these boys are born after about a 400-year time period of something bad. So Moshe is born after 400 years or so of slavery in Egypt. Meanwhile, Jesus, if you remember back, the space between the Old and New Testaments is about 400 years of what they call the intertestament silence. And at the end of that is when Jesus arrives on the scene. Both of these baby boys were born in a time when all the Jewish kids around them were supposed to be killed. Right? So Pharaoh wanted all the baby boys thrown into the Nile River, and then Herod wanted all the Jewish baby boys to be killed because he was afraid of a possible king. Number 3, both baby boys had to be hidden to escape certain death because of those rulers wanting to kill the baby boys. Number 4, both were born to humble parents, right? So Moshe's parents were unidentified Levites, and Jesus was born to Joseph and Mary, who were nothing of any particular fanciness when it came to the nation of Israel. Both were then noticed by royalty. So Moshe happened to be noticed by Pharaoh's daughter, picked up and taken out and adopted. Jesus was born by humble parents, but then noticed by the wise men who came and brought him gifts. Both were adopted. Moshe adopted by Pharaoh's daughter, and Jesus adopted by Joseph, who was not technically his father. Last two. Both of these two individuals were from the right stock. Here's what I mean by that. Moshe was born an Israelite. He was born a Jewish young boy. That's the right stock, God's people. Jesus was born of the right stock because he literally was God in the flesh. Right? So he's of the right material because he is God come to earth. Both were also of the wrong stock. Here's what I mean by that, the quote-unquote wrong stock. Moshe was raised in the Pharaoh's family. Like, this is precisely the enemy of Israel, and there he is being raised inside the house of the enemy. Meanwhile, Jesus was raised as a human. These are the humans that since the beginning of time have all rebelled against God himself, and Jesus is going to be raised as a human, though he is also God. Here's my guess as to where you might be right now. You probably are asking one or two of the following questions. The first question in your brain that you might be asking is, well, Pastor Luke, that's really cool and all, that you have all these cool lists of connections between Moses and Jesus and their birth stories, but are there any others? And the answer to that is a resounding Yes, there are tons of others, and I can't wait as we go through this series to find more and more and more of them. The second question you might be asking is something like this. If I were to be playing, Bible Jeopardy tomorrow, or if I go and hang out with Todd because he kind of knows all the ins and outs of geeky things related to the Bible, this information would really help me. But since I'm not playing Bible Jeopardy and since Todd didn't invite me over, your question is something like, what on earth does this have to do with my actual life? Right? Like, I got up this morning, I put on my adult clothes, and I came to church, and I could read this stuff in the Bible. This is the story of Moshe. What does this have to do practically with my life? And I'm super stoked to share what I think is a really helpful answer to that question. But before we get to the answer, I have to first finish kind of going through the narration of Exodus chapter 2. So we'll get there. Just hang on. We have to finish Exodus 2 first. All right, so you may or may not be familiar with this story, but the little baby Moshe, raised by Pharaoh's daughter, he grows up and he becomes an adult. And when he becomes an adult, the passage doesn't tell us super clearly how much or how little he exactly understood of his Jewish heritage. But what we do know is that at some point in time, he had to know enough that at some point in time, Moshe goes out. He goes out of Pharaoh's house, and he's kind of looking upon his people, and he does something that is really fascinating. It says in verse 11 there, he went out to his people, and he looked on their burdens. Now, you might just gloss over this. Yeah, that's cool. Moshe went out, and he looked on their burdens. This is actually a huge deal. Here's why. My experience with people is that almost everybody goes through almost all of their life being concerned about how anything out there has to do with themselves. Right? Like what does this impact me? How does this affect me? What does this do for me? How does this relate to me? And it's a huge deal that this young man, Moshe, went out and he looked upon his people and he noticed their burdens. It's almost precisely the same question that Janelle and Ann are asking us right now. What does it look like for us to go out into the world and to notice, even with all the challenges and burdens that we have, that there's some other people out there that have some burdens? And not only did Moses notice those things, which was a huge deal, he actually was courageously interested in doing something about it. What did he do? Well, he happened to notice that there was a Jewish laborer slave and an Egyptian slave master, and the Egyptian slave master was mistreating this Jewish man, and so Moses killed the guy. And we struggle with that because it's like, was that murder? Like, was he helping? Like, what was he doing there? And the text doesn't give us a lot of answers to that question. It says that he killed him and he buried him in the sand. Next day, Moses goes out. 2 Jewish guys are fighting. He doesn't kill any of them. Word spreads about this whole incident. Pharaoh finds out. Pharaoh says, I'm going to kill Moshe because he killed one of my Egyptian slave masters. He's clearly not on our side. He's not helping the Egyptian cause. Moshe finds out, and what does he do? He takes off. He goes about 200 or 300 miles away through the desert. If you ever watched the movie 10 Commandments, from the theme music that when I walked up, it has this really great scene of Moshe just exhausted, kind of escaping away from Pharaoh that wants to kill him. One of the most powerful people in the world wants to kill him for what he did to this Egyptian. And Moshe is gone. And in a very real way, disappointment sets in yet again. Here's what I mean. The end of Exodus chapter 1, I left y'all last Sunday at a really kind of tragic point, right? Sin, slavery, death, hopelessness, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Here comes baby boy Moshe. He's born, and now all of a sudden we have hope. A deliverer might be coming. This is great news. We have hope. We can be excited. He kills the Egyptian guy and he takes off. And I'm guessing that you all have some tangible feeling in your life of this same idea, which is the person that you were putting your hope in for solving your problems or fixing your life actually fails you and doesn't come through. They end up taking off. They leave you isolated and alone. Here's one of the reasons I know this to be the case. I had the chance for 10 years to teach a bunch of high school kids, and when I did that, one of the most interesting things I got to observe is high school relationships, right? So like infatuous relationships between high school kids. And if you ever watch this, it's very fascinating. What you usually find is something like this. Teenage boy or teenage girl, doesn't particularly matter which, they meet this person, and this person, they're pretty convinced is going to be the savior of their life, right? Like, for the girl, this guy is going to be her Prince Charming. He's going to solve all her problems. He's going to fight valiantly and fix every issue she has in her life. He's going to listen well. He's going to care. He's going to be so responsive and wonderful and great and awesome. And her life is going to be fulfilled and great from there on into the future. And for the teenage guy, he probably pictures, right, like, I'm just going to like lay around in a hammock and she'll feed me grapes. And she's just going to do everything to make my life as great as it possibly could be. And in a teenage kind of infatuation relationship, there's a certain amount of pressure on the other person that realistically never gets fulfilled. And what I'm relatively convinced of is that this exact same problem that happens in teenagers also happens in us as adults. We just try to disguise it better. Here's what I mean. There's also people who are on relationship 2, 3, 4, 5, who are just waiting to try to find that exact right person who's going to somehow solve all of their issues. There's another way this shows up, I think, especially in parents who put all of the hope for their future and their salvation into pressure that they place on their children. Right? Like, my salvation is going to be that if these kids turn out to be perfect in the way that I want them to be perfect, then my life is worthwhile. We ask questions like this. We put pressure on our kids, and no kid can handle precisely that pressure. There's another way this shows up. I'm speaking mostly to the guys here. Drew Allar. Anybody know this guy? Drew Allar. Yes, thank you. So Penn State football, my hope is that they are going to finally win a national championship. And how are they going to do that? Sean Clifford, let's throw him by the wayside. Let's get Drew Allar in there. And this person is going to be our salvation. Yes, right. The point is, and you know it's true, that you're putting your hopes and dreams on that merely human individual. And like, my question sometimes is, let's say that happens. Let's say they win the national championship. Like, is that going to be as fulfilling to you as you hope? I'm just asking the question. Election season's coming up, and it's very dangerous for pastors to talk about politics, but I'm going to do it anyhow. There's a lot of folks who say, you know, the world is going down the tubes, everything is bad, we're all in slavery, everything's terrible. If only we can get the right political individual into office, then our salvation will come to pass. Things will be perfect. My life will be fulfilled, our society will be better, everything will get on the right track again, problem solved, et cetera, et cetera. Here's my point for today. I'll just make this super clear. No merely human individual can handle the weight of being your deliverer. No merely human individual can handle the weight of being your deliverer. The end of Exodus chapter 2, it concludes in a really fascinating way. Starting at verse 25, here's what is described, the end of Exodus chapter 2. During those many days, the king of Egypt died. The people of Israel groaned because of their slavery and cried out for help. Their cry for rescue from slavery came up to God, and God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham and with Isaac and with Jacob. God saw the people of Israel, and God knew. That's in the ESV. If you read it in the NIV, it says God was concerned about them. If you read it in the New Living Translation, it says God knew it was time to act. The really fascinating thing about Exodus, the first two chapters of Exodus is this. God is hardly mentioned at all in all of Exodus 1 and the beginning of Exodus 2. It's the story of slavery, it's the story of Moshe, it's the story of the whole rest. There's not a peep, really, from God so far up until this section of verses right here. And here's what I think that means. I think it means this. It can seem like God is distant or uninvolved, like he doesn't care. Like the Israelites were going through their lives, and they're in slavery, in bondage, they're suffering, there's problems, there's everything. And it can seem as if God is completely oblivious to all of this that's going on. But that's just how it seems. That's not how it actually is. In reality, God knew, and as they cried out to him, God knew it was time to act. Now, when he acts, he's certainly going to involve Moshe, but the point of my sermon today is basically this. Moshe is not the deliverer. The book of Exodus God's going to use Moshe, he's going to be involved, all this kind of stuff, but the actual deliverer is God himself. He's the one that's going to act. He's the one that's going to bring deliverance. It's always been that case, and it will always be that case. And here's how we know it. Galatians chapter 4 says that about exactly the right time, God acted. And what he acted in doing was that Jesus himself wrote himself into the story of this world, and he came into this life, and he was the perfect, he was better than Moses, he was the perfect Israel, he was the perfect person at the right time for the right thing. And what Jesus did is this. You all know the story. Whether you're in church all the time or not, you all know the story. Jesus goes, and he goes up, and he is crucified on a cross. And the question I want to leave you with today is this one. What held Jesus on the cross? What held Jesus on the cross? Here's why I want to ask that question. Moshe seemed like he might be the deliverer, right? There's the similarities and differences. Here's the difference between Moshe and Jesus. We thought Moshe was going to be deliverer. He was going to save his people. He was going to do all this stuff. He ran away. If you think the thing that held Jesus on the cross was 3 metal nails, you completely understand the story wrong. You completely understand the story wrong. Here's why. Jesus said, I have legions of angels that I can call down. Like, you think that the creator of the universe couldn't have just done some stuff and got those nails to come loose. So easy. That's the easiest thing in the world for Jesus to do. That's child's play. Instead, what held him to the cross is the fact that he's the deliverer. And that he notices your pain. So if you're in pain, if you're suffering grief, if you have some kind of anxiety, depression, however you showed up this morning to get here, wherever you're feeling, God in Jesus communicates that he notices that. And not only does he notice, he's not oblivious, he came to act, right? He knew it was time to act, and he got involved. And how he got involved was that he took the consequences of all the crazy mess that's causing you to be in a bad spot, and he took that upon himself because he loves you. So when you walk out the door today, I just want you to hear from Pastor Luke, as clearly as I can say it, the message of the deliverer of the Bible is that Jesus completely knows you and completely loves you. That he wants your good, that he cares about you, that God has always been the kind of God who says, when people are suffering, I'm going to get involved, and I'm going to serve as their deliverer. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, I just pray for these folks today. I thank you for them. I thank you that they are open to hearing from you. I pray, Lord, that you would help us to get a beautiful, beautiful picture of the deliverer. I pray that you'd help us to push back the cultural lie that says that we have to be our own deliverers, that we have to earn enough, that we have to manage things, that we have to make things happen in the way that we're responsible. I pray, Lord, that you'd push back on the cultural lie that says our deliverer is going to be found in that love interest or that football player or that politician or whoever it might be. And I pray, Lord, that you'd help us to see that the only person who can carry the weight of being the ultimate deliverer is you. And that as we read and think about the story of Jesus, we find that not only is our deliverer coming, but he has come. And that means all the difference in the world in our lives. I pray you'd encourage these folks. They could go out literally with more courage because they know that you notice them and you love them. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.